Imagine this. A man stands at the edge of a bridge, clutching a bottle in his hand. His mind spins with thoughts he can't control. His addiction isn't just to the substance, it's to the escape it offers. A desperate cry for something deeper. Now, picture someone else, endlessly scrolling through their phone, seeking a dopamine hit with every notification. Though these addictions may seem worlds apart, they stem from the same place, an aching void demanding to be filled. Today, we will unravel the intricate psychology of addiction through the profound insights of Carl Jung and the modern perspectives of Gabor Maté. We'll explore not only the why of addiction, but also the paths to healing. And in the end, we will confront the most crucial revelation of all, one that might just change the way you perceive addiction forever. Let us embark on a journey that transcends judgment and offers profound understanding, examining the human need to numb, to escape, and to search for meaning in the most unexpected ways. At its core, addiction is a deeply human experience. Carl Jung once explained that addiction often arises from spiritual emptiness, a disconnection from the soul's purpose. He argued that addicts are not simply weak or self-destructive, but are searching for wholeness in the wrong places. Jung famously linked addiction to a lack of spiritual grounding, describing it as a misguided attempt to replace a deeper sense of belonging. Consider this. When people turn to substances, behaviors, or even ideals, they are not merely seeking pleasure, they are seeking relief. Relief from pain, from loneliness, from a sense of not being enough. Gabor Maté, a renowned contemporary expert on addiction, expands on Jung's ideas, asserting that every addiction originates from a wound. The question is not why the addiction, he says, but why the pain? Think back to the man on the bridge. What led him there? Perhaps it was years of unresolved trauma, a childhood of neglect, or the crushing weight of expectations. Addiction becomes a survival mechanism, a way to cope with what feels unbearable. It is not a choice but a response to deep-seated pain. But where does this pain come from? According to Maté, it often begins in childhood. A child who grows up feeling unsafe, unloved, or unseen develops a fractured sense of self. To navigate their world, they suppress their true feelings, adopting behaviors to gain approval or avoid conflict. Over time, this suppression creates a chasm within, a gap between who they are and who they believe they need to be. Addiction then becomes an attempt to bridge that gap. Let's pause here and reflect. Have you ever wondered why addiction is so pervasive, even in societies with abundant resources? Despite advancements in technology, medicine, and communication, people are lonelier than ever, disconnected from themselves, from others, and from the world around them. This disconnection creates fertile ground for addiction to take root. Jung believed that healing addiction required reconnection, a return to the self. This idea is echoed in Maté's work, which emphasizes compassion, not condemnation, as the foundation of recovery. When addicts are met with understanding rather than judgment, they are more likely to confront the roots of their pain. This is where the psychology of addiction becomes transformative. It challenges us to see beyond the surface, to view the addict not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be understood. Imagine how different the world might be if we approached addiction with curiosity instead of criticism. If, instead of asking, "What's wrong with you?" we asked, "What happened to you?" As we delve deeper, we'll uncover the ways society perpetuates addiction by ignoring its root causes. We'll explore how cultural pressures, stigmas, and even modern lifestyles fuel the cycle of dependency. And most importantly, we will examine how both Jung and Maté offer pathways to healing that are as relevant today as they were decades ago. But remember, the most important revelation is yet to come. By the end of this journey, we will uncover a perspective that not only illuminates the truth about addiction, but also holds the key to breaking free from its grip. Whether for yourself or someone you love, understanding this truth can be life-changing. Now let's continue to peel back the layers of this complex and deeply human experience. The modern world offers endless ways to numb ourselves, but true healing begins when we stop running and start understanding. We scroll through social media, binge-watch shows, overwork, overeat, or seek solace in substances. At first glance, these behaviors may seem harmless, but they all share a common thread: avoidance. Maté refers to addiction as a response to human suffering. This perspective urges us to see addiction not as Gabor a flaw, but as a coping mechanism, a misguided attempt to soothe inner turmoil. Maté describes addiction as having three distinct components: craving, temporary relief, and negative consequences. It's a cycle that ensnares individuals because, even as the consequences mount, the craving persists with relentless intensity. But what is this craving truly for? It's not just for the substance or behavior itself, it's for the relief it brings. For a fleeting moment, the pain subsides, the chaos quiets, and that brief reprieve becomes something the mind and body desperately seek to replicate. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever relied on something to get through a tough time? Perhaps it was coffee to push through a stressful project, or food to ease a moment of sadness. These are everyday examples of how we all turn to behaviors for comfort. The difference between a habit and an addiction, however, lies in how much control it holds over us, whether it serves us or begins to consume us. Carl Jung believed that an addict's craving for wholeness is a spiritual problem. He argued that a society fixated on material success and external validation often neglects the deeper needs of the soul. In one of his most famous cases, Jung treated a man whose addiction to alcohol had left him on the brink of despair. He explained to this man that what he truly sought was not intoxication, but the spiritual awakening alcohol symbolized. This was the genesis of a powerful idea: addiction can only be healed by addressing the deeper spiritual void it seeks to fill. Here, Jung's ideas intersect with Gabor Maté's focus on trauma. Maté explains that addiction is rooted in a disruption of our connection to ourselves, a disconnection that often begins in childhood. When children grow up in environments that fail to meet their emotional needs, they learn to suppress their true selves in order to survive. Over time, this suppression leads to a profound loss of authenticity. As adults, we carry these wounds, often unknowingly, and seek ways to avoid the pain of disconnection. Addiction then becomes one of those ways. Maté describes this as a cycle. Trauma leads to disconnection, disconnection leads to pain, and pain leads to addiction. The solution, therefore, lies not in merely addressing the addiction itself, but in healing the underlying trauma. This raises a crucial question: how can we begin to heal? Both Jung and Maté emphasize the importance of reconnection to ourselves, to others, and to a sense of meaning. For Jung, this meant embarking on the journey of individuation, integrating both the conscious and unconscious parts of the self to achieve wholeness. For Maté, healing requires a compassionate space where individuals can explore the roots of their pain without fear of judgment. But healing is not easy. It demands that we confront the truths we have spent years avoiding. It calls for vulnerability, self-reflection, and the courage to ask difficult questions. What pain am I avoiding? What part of myself have I lost touch with? Am I willing to face the discomfort of healing in order to break free from the chains of addiction? Imagine a world where these questions were not met with shame, but with understanding. A world where addiction was not a label, but a lens through which we could view the human condition with greater compassion. This is the vision that both Jung and Maté invite us to embrace. A world where connection replaces condemnation and empathy takes precedence over judgment. The journey to recovery is not linear. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the pain feels insurmountable. But as Jung reminds us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This means confronting our shadows, the parts of ourselves we have hidden or rejected, and learning to integrate them into our lives. Maté echoes this sentiment, emphasizing that healing requires authenticity. We must reclaim the parts of ourselves that were abandoned in order to fit in or survive. This process can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. It allows us to move beyond the cycle of addiction and step into a life defined not by avoidance, but by presence. As we move forward, we will explore practical ways to apply these principles in our lives. We will uncover strategies for reconnecting with ourselves, healing our inner wounds, and building the resilience needed to face life's challenges without resorting to addiction. And remember, The most profound revelation is yet to come, a truth that will not only illuminate the path to understanding addiction, but will also deepen our understanding of ourselves. To truly grasp addiction, we must shift our focus from its symptoms to its source. Addiction is often mistaken as the problem itself, but in reality, it is merely a symptom of something deeper, a disconnection from the self. As both Carl Jung and Gabor Maté suggest, by addressing the root cause, we can begin to break free from the cycles of dependency that hold so many in their grip. Gabor Maté shares a powerful story about one of his patients who struggled with severe addiction. This patient had endured unimaginable trauma during childhood, including abandonment and abuse. For years, she sought refuge in substances that numbed her pain. But it wasn't until she began to confront the memories she had buried that she took her first steps toward healing. Her story illustrates a profound truth. Recovery is not about willpower or strength. It's about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way. Think about this in your own life. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to sit with uncomfortable emotions? Perhaps you distract yourself with work, entertainment, or other activities to avoid confronting what lies beneath. This avoidance is a natural response to pain, but it can also create a cycle of disconnection. Carl Jung described this as a fragmentation of the psyche, a splitting off of parts of ourselves that we find too painful or unacceptable to face. According to Jung, healing involves reintegration. He called this process individuation, a journey of becoming whole by bringing the unconscious aspects of ourselves into awareness. It's not an easy path, but it is necessary for true recovery. By facing our shadows, we reclaim our power and restore the balance that addiction disrupts. Maté complements this perspective with his emphasis on compassion. He explains that people cannot heal in isolation. They need connection, understanding, and support. This is why environments of shame and punishment only perpetuate addiction. When people are met with empathy and given the tools to explore their pain, they can begin to heal. But how can we create such environments? It starts with changing our perspective on addiction. Instead of viewing it as a moral failing or a sign of weakness, we must see it as a response to pain. Ask yourself, what would happen if we approached addiction with curiosity instead of judgment? How might the world change if we replaced stigma with support? One key to healing is reconnecting with our bodies and emotions. Addiction often creates a disconnect, making it difficult to feel or process emotions fully. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and therapy help bridge this gap. They teach us to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, creating a safe space to explore the pain we've been avoiding. Jung's work reminds us that the journey inward is just as important as the journey outward. He believed that addiction was, at its core, a spiritual crisis, a longing for meaning and connection. In his view, true recovery requires more than just abstinence. It requires a transformation of the soul. This idea is echoed in the concept of the spiritual awakening that often occurs in recovery. When we reconnect with our inner selves, we open the door to a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. Maté expands on this by emphasizing the role of community in recovery. He points out that humans are wired for connection, and isolation only exacerbates addiction. Support groups, therapy, and meaningful relationships are crucial in providing the safety and understanding necessary for healing. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles and that there is hope even in the darkest moments. Let's pause to consider, how can we foster deeper connections in our lives? How can we create spaces where people feel seen, heard, and valued? These are not just questions for those struggling with addiction, they are questions for all of us. As we approach the conclusion of this journey, it's important to remember that healing is not a destination, it is a process. It requires patience, courage, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths we often avoid. But as both Jung and Maté remind us, it is through this process that we find not only recovery, but also growth. In our next segment, we will unveil the most profound insight of all, a revelation that ties together everything we've explored so far. This final piece will not only deepen your understanding of addiction, but also offer a path forward, one rooted in compassion, connection, and the courage to face ourselves. As we reach the final stage of our journey into the psychology of addiction, we are confronted with the most profound truth of all. Addiction is not the enemy. It is a messenger. It signals that something within us is out of alignment, something yearning for healing, understanding, and connection. Carl Jung believed that addiction represents a misguided search for transcendence. He noted that the human soul is drawn to experiences of awe, connection, and meaning. When these needs are unmet, we seek substitutes, substances, behaviors, or distractions that mimic the sense of fulfillment we crave. This is why addiction often feels like a relentless pursuit. It is an attempt to fill a void that cannot be satisfied externally. But here is the revelation. The antidote to addiction is not control, it is connection. Connection to ourselves, to others, and to a deeper sense of purpose. This idea is at the heart of Gabor Maté's philosophy, which asserts that healing begins when we move away from shame and toward understanding. Think of the stories we've explored. The man on the bridge, the child who grew up in chaos, the patient burdened by trauma. Each of these individuals was seeking connection in the only way they knew how, and while their methods were destructive, their intentions were profoundly human. They were trying to survive, to cope, to find a sense of belonging. The path forward, then, is not to condemn, but to compassionately guide. It is to create environments where people feel safe enough to confront their pain and supported enough to seek healthier ways of coping. Jung called this process bringing the unconscious to light, a journey of self-discovery that empowers individuals to reclaim their wholeness. Maté adds that this journey requires us to redefine our relationship with pain. Instead of avoiding it, we must learn to sit with it, to listen to what it has to teach us. Pain, he argues, is not our enemy. It is a signal that something needs attention. When we approach it with curiosity and compassion, we begin to heal, not just the addiction, but the wounds that caused it. But what does this look like in practice? It starts with small intentional steps. For some, it might mean seeking therapy or joining a support group. For others, it might involve reconnecting with passions or practices that bring joy and meaning. Mindfulness, meditation, and journaling are powerful tools for exploring the inner world and fostering self-awareness. Jung also emphasized the importance of community in the healing process. He believed that true transformation happens not in isolation, but through relationships. This is echoed in Maté's work, which highlights the role of connection in breaking the cycle of addiction. Whether through friendships, family, or recovery programs, having a network of support is essential for lasting change. Imagine a world where every person struggling with addiction was met with empathy instead of judgment. Where the question wasn't, "Why can't you stop?" but "How can I help?" This shift in perspective has the power to transform not only individual lives, but entire communities. As we conclude, let's return to the central idea that addiction is a symptom of disconnection. It is not about weakness or failure. It is about unmet needs and unhealed wounds. Jung and Maté remind us that recovery is not about fixing what is broken, but about rediscovering what has been lost. Our sense of self, our capacity for connection, and our ability to experience joy and meaning. Now think about your own life. Where might you be seeking connection? What parts of yourself have you neglected or forgotten? And how can you begin the process of reconnection today? These questions are not just for those grappling with addiction, they are for all of us. Because ultimately, addiction is not a story of despair. It is a story of resilience, of the human spirit's capacity to endure, and of the possibility for transformation. By understanding the psychology of addiction, we gain not only insight, but also hope. A hope that healing is possible, that connection is attainable, and that wholeness is within reach. As we close this chapter, remember this. Addiction is not the end of the story. It is a call to awaken, to grow, and to rediscover the beauty of being fully alive.